If you think there's a lot of terms on the board, you'll hear every one of them if you read the newspapers or watch the news, or you'll hear, or even check the news online. Yes.
Are we finishing chapter 6 or are we straight?
I looked at chapter 6 early this morning and decided that every question that's on the test I already have been over. So there's nothing really more for me to want to look at about chapter 6, because chapter 7 is so much more important. I did not really finish chapter 6, I told you that, but again, I looked at it and decided, hey, the stateless societies, woodland Indians, Pueblo Indians, the stateless societies that did not have a central government, just tribal peoples, roaming tribal peoples, somewhat. Like the Bedouins here, roaming tribal people, except the difference is Bedouins tend to follow herds or follow trade routes. But I believe I pretty well covered all of chapter 6. I really want to get into chapter 7, so that's a good question. Anyway, that's my plan. But I looked at chapter 6 this morning and thought, well, the stuff I said in class Wednesday, and if you read the chapter, you'll do well on that part of the test. Okay, any other questions? All right, move on. Again, if you think there's a lot of terms here, these are all important. I have never taught a class that is so relevant to the present time as I believe this one is. What they did back there 1,400 years ago is affecting us today very, very, very strongly. We need to understand Islam, folk, as much as it can be understood. We need to know a little bit about where it came from, how it got to be, what it got to be, what it teaches. First of all, starting at the beginning, the word Islam means submission, which means you obey the person in authority over you, even if it's a big brother, an older brother. Younger brothers obey older brothers, and women always obey the men in their lives, whether it's their father or their husbands. Obedience is stressed. All right. However, that's jumping around a bit. I want to start at the beginning, start in the days before Muhammad. Islam began right here in Arabia. Arabia is a large place. We don't know much about what was going on in Arabia at the time because they did not do any writing. Instead, people who visited would write about them. What we have gathered was that they were a tribal people. Arabia is a big desert. But in the desert, there's areas called oases. In other words, it might be a lake or a pond, an area where there's water. And around this water hole, whether it be a well, again, it might even be a well, around this water hole, they'll build a small town. This is, again, called an oasis. We know that the people living there were small tribal peoples who would sometimes conduct raids on their neighbors, go visit a neighboring oasis, steal from it, and then rush back to their own oasis. These little raids were called jihads. And the term jihad now, I mean, your book talks about it at length, has several meanings. The most common meaning is holy war. Your book says that, the word should be used sparingly and be used carefully. Now, the people here were poor. They were what we call Bedouins. Yeah, moved about from place to place, oftentimes subsistence living, very little money, if any, in their economy, and they lived by, you might say, scratching, eking out a living from the desert. Farming was bad, hunting was bad, fishing wasn't much better. Oftentimes they lived by stealing. But then, there were continual wars going on between the Byzantine Empire, that's what was left of the Roman Empire. The Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire were continuing the wars that have been going on since the days the Byzantine Empire was part of the Roman Empire. And these wars made it difficult for traders to come from the Far East, from India and China, to the Mediterranean world. So what they decided to do was, hey, let's just go by sea down here to the Red Sea. So they decided to take this route to go to the Far East. And ships have to pull in at port to get water and other supplies. They would often stop here at Mecca. And as a result, they would trade for some of the wares. And some of the people at Mecca learned to trade commodities, trade goods, buy it low, sell it high, when the price would fluctuate, and they began to be wealthy. Now, into this scenario was born Mohammed. Mohammed's parents had both died when he was 6, and this was very common in those days for people to die young. Mohammed was orphaned, passed around from one guardian to another, grew up, and married a widow woman who was quite wealthy. She'd been the wife of a merchant. And then in his mind he began to have conflicts. Now, on a personal note, having grown up in poverty myself, you're often taught when you grow up poor that the rich are evil. The rich are a generation of snakes. And they got that way by stealing and conniving and thieving. And you should never try to be rich, because if you become rich, you'll become as evil as they are. Mohammed had this drilled into him and ingrained in him that the rich were evil. Then all of a sudden he found himself rich. Now, folk, every one of us almost, if we admit it, we grew up in our parents' home. Maybe we didn't, but a lot of us did. And our parents taught us certain values. Then we get out from under our parents' noses and face the world and find out that there are other people with other values than yours. And it's a painful transitional process. Yes, I went through it myself. Everybody does. Mohammed went through it, and it really disturbed me. Hey, I'm rich. Does that mean that I'm evil? Does that mean I'm bad? And all these my neighbors. I mean, I'm now associated with rich people, and they have some of the same faults and problems that my guardians always said they had. So, to satisfy his longing for righteousness, he went out into the desert to meditate and pray. While he was there, according to his own story, the angel Gabriel appeared to him and gave him a message. The message that was eventually written in a book called the Quran. Now, when I was in school, we spelled this K-O-R-A-N. Now they're saying it should be spelled Q-U-R-A-N. Just like the word Muslim used to be spelled M-O-S-L-E-M. Now they want us to spell it Muslim. Anyway, he believed that, backing up a bit, he had a lot of contact with Jewish rabbis and Christian priests. He went frequently talked to the rabbis and the priests, and they made fun of him, which I guess probably upset him a lot. Even though if they had known what was going to happen, maybe they would have paid more attention to him. But he knew about Moses. He knew about the writings of Moses. He knew about what had been written about Jesus. So he decided, or he heard that Moses, that was the Jewish, the person who set forth the Jewish faith, and Jesus, the founder of the Christian faith, that they had only received a part of the revelation, but that he, Mohammed, had been given the rest of it, and he had the full revelation from Allah. Well, once he had become fully convinced that he was a prophet, he tried to convert the people of Mecca. The people of Mecca resisted him, and they persecuted him and his followers. He did make a few converts, but he was persecuted. So he took his followers and fled to Medina. I believe that might be pronounced Medina, but he fled up here, straight north. And this flight is known as the Hijra. It is so important in the Islamic world that they count time from this point. Just like Christians count time from the birth of Jesus, the Muslims count time from the point of Muhammad's flight from Mecca. Here in Medina, all right, Jesus himself once said a prophet has a lot of honor outside his own country and no honor among his own people. In Medina, his message was accepted. He was looked on the prophet, he converted the people of Medina, then he got them together in a great army, marched back to Mecca, took the city of Mecca, and converted its followers by sword point. And this was the beginning of conversions at the point of a sword. What Islam taught, fire and sword. Once he had converted Mecca, he looked around now. The city of Mecca had a rock, a black rock, called the Kaaba, which they said fell down from heaven. It's probably a meteorite. That probably in a clear, open Arab sky, meteorites can be seen because they're seldom a cloud. And probably a meteorite. And the Arabs would gather around this stone and worship around this stone. And around this stone they erected 360 idols, one for each day of the year. You might say, I know there's 365 days of the year, but some calendars only use 360 and then add 5 days as a leap month every once in a while. But anyway, when Muhammad went back, he looked around the Kaaba and saw these idols. And it has been said that he threw down every one of them. They said, we are going to become a monotheistic country. We only worship one God. But he spared the one God that he believed was the right God, whom we call Allah. Now, a lot of Islamic people will say that this is not exactly the way it happened. Again, there is some question about the exact details. There has been, some persons who will say one thing and some another. It's difficult to get away from it, but some people will tell you that Allah was initially nothing more than a tribal god, a local tribal god, whom Muhammad made his favorite. And other person will dispute that and say, no, Allah really was the chief god of the Arabs all along. It's pretty well established fact that before Muhammad, the Arabs were polytheistic, and Muhammad converted them to monotheism.